All right, everyone, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling integration testing.
Ooh, yeah.
And whether you're like coding all day, every day, or just curious about how software, actually works, this is
Wow.
going to be good. Our main source is this article, Integration Testing, Ensuring Components Work Together.
Catchy title.
I know, right? But honestly, it's packed with juicy stuff. We're talking about like when integration testing goes right, when it goes so wrong, and hopefully you'll come away with some like light bulb moments, you know what I mean?
Definitely. And what people often miss is that it's not just about, oh, did the program crash? It's about these sneaky problems
Yeah.
that hide until different parts of the system have to actually talk to each other.
Right.
Data going haywire, things slowing down, even security holes.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that can really make or break a project.
It's like, okay, imagine you built this awesome car engine
Yeah.
and the wheels, top of the line. But if they don't work together?
You're not going anywhere.
Exactly. So first things first, what is integration testing?
It's that bridge between two other kinds of testing, right?
Mm.
You get unit testing, where each little piece is checked on its own.
Okay.
And then system testing, where you're looking at the whole application. Integration testing is that middle ground.
Gotcha.
And make sure all those pieces fit together seamlessly, no hiccups.
So it's not enough to just know each part works solo, got to make sure they play nice as a team. But why is that such a huge deal?
Because software nowadays,
Yeah.
it's not simple. We're talking tons of modules, APIs, databases, stuff coming in from outside even. And the more connections you have, the more places things can go wrong.
Right.
Yeah, and the article lays out some of the problems integration testing prevents. Interface defects.
Okay.
That's when two components just can't communicate.
Uh-oh.
Then there's data flow issues. Information getting lost on its way somewhere.
Oh, no.
And, performance bottlenecks. That's when everything slows to a crawl.
Yeah, that's the worst. And honestly, those are just the beginning. You got security gaps, compliance issues, things that can cost a company a lot of money and a lot of headaches if they're not caught early.
And this example from the article really stuck with me. Imagine an e-commerce site, right? But their inventory system and their checkout process, they don't talk to each other properly.
Oh, boy.
So you could order something that's totally out of stock.
Oof, that's bad for everyone. The customer's disappointed, the company's scrambling to fix it, their reputation takes a hit. It's just a mess.
Big mess. Okay, so we're convinced integration testing is important. But the article goes into different types of integration testing, and some of the names were kind of new to me.
Yeah, there are a few ways to approach it. It depends on what you're building, how complicated it is, and honestly, what kind of risks you're worried about. Let's start with top-down integration. The article compares it to testing a car's engine before the wheels.
So you're starting with the most important parts, those core functions, and then slowly adding in the smaller pieces that depend on them. Exactly. It's like building a pyramid. You start at the top and work your way down.
Okay.
Then there's bottom up. That's the opposite. You start with the simplest parts, like the foundation of a house, then you build on top of that.
Gotcha.
So you're making sure each piece is solid before adding more complexity.
Interesting. Then there's this thing called the Big Bang approach, which, to be honest, doesn't sound very, planned.
Well, it can be tempting, right? Just throw everything together, see if it works. But in reality, that's a recipe for disaster, especially with complex systems.
Imagine trying to find a problem when everything is all jumbled up like that. Where do you even begin?
Yeah, it's a nightmare for debugging. That's why a lot of teams prefer the hybrid approach. It takes the best parts of top-down and bottom-up testing and combines them.
So it's about being strategic, right? You look at what parts of the system are most important, what parts are most likely to cause problems, and you test them in a way that makes sense for that specific project.
Exactly. It's about finding the right balance. Now, the fun part. The article has some case studies, real-world examples of integration testing gone right.
And some epic fails, right?
Oh, yeah. They really show how much of an impact integration testing, or the lack of it, can have on businesses, users, even entire industries.
Okay, let's hear them. Hit me with the first case study.
All right. So there's this big online retailer, and they were launching a brand new payment system.
Sounds exciting.
It should have been, but they didn't test it properly with the rest of their website. Transactions started failing, customers were confused, and it really hurt the company's reputation.
Hold on, they built this whole new payment system, but didn't make sure it worked with their existing inventory, their shipping, their customer database.
That's pretty much what happened. They were so focused on the new, shiny thing that they forgot to make sure it played nicely with everything else.
Okay.
Classic example of how skipping integration testing can lead to a domino effect.
Ouch.
Yeah, one mistake can trigger a whole bunch of problems down the line.
That's a good lesson. Okay, what's the next case study?
This one's about a banking app. You know, the kind we use all the time to manage our money.
Ooh, this is getting personal.
Right. So they had all the usual features. You could check your balance, transfer funds, track your transactions.
The basics.
Exactly. But what they didn't test thoroughly was how all those features interacted with each other, especially when you were doing multiple things at once.
Like if I'm transferring money between accounts really quickly.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And what integration testing revealed was that there were discrepancies in the data. So imagine you make a few quick transfers, but your account balance doesn't update correctly.
Wait, so my money could just, like, disappear?
No, luckily no money actually went missing. But it shows how important it is to test those interactions, especially when you're dealing with sensitive information like financial data.
That's a relief. Okay, so we've seen some pretty scary examples of what happens when you don't do integration testing. But does the article have any, like, success stories where integration testing saved the day?
It does. There's a case study about a social media company. They were rolling out a new feature, the ability to tag friends in photos.
It's pretty simple.
On the surface, yeah. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes. You've got image processing, user databases, notifications, privacy settings. It gets complicated fast.
So they did do proper integration testing.
Yep, and it paid off. They found a bug where people who were tagged in photos weren't always getting notifications.
Oh, so you could be in a photo and people are talking about you, but you'd never know.
Exactly. Not a good look for a social media platform. But because they caught it early, they were able to fix it before it became a big problem for users.
That's a good save. So these case studies are great examples of how integration testing can either prevent disaster or make sure things run smoothly.
Right? It's not just about avoiding glitches. It's about creating software that we can trust and rely on. So how do we make sure we're doing integration testing the right way?
Yeah, let's talk strategy.
Well, the article has some great tips, things that can really make a difference. One of the biggest is automation.
Automation. Everyone's talking about it.
For good reason. Imagine having to manually test every single interaction between every component in a big, complicated system.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It would be. But with automation, you can write scripts that run these tests automatically.
So instead of having a team of people clicking through everything, you have software doing the work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It saves time, it's more accurate, and you can even schedule these tests to run, say, every time new code is added. Which brings us to another important best practice: continuous integration.
Continuous integration. I've heard that term thrown around.
It's a game changer. Basically, every time a developer makes a change to the code, those changes are automatically tested.
So you're constantly checking for errors.
Yep. It's much more efficient than waiting until the very end of a project to test everything.
Makes sense. Okay, so automation and continuous integration. Got it. Any other nuggets of wisdom from the article?
Yes, prioritizing. You can't test everything equally. Some parts of the system are just more important than others.
Because they handle sensitive data, or they're more likely to have problems.
Right. By focusing on the high-risk areas, you can make sure the most crucial parts of your software are rock solid.
Smart. This all makes sense in theory, but in reality, I'm sure there are challenges to integration testing, right?
Of course. Nothing is ever easy. One of the biggest hurdles is just the sheer complexity of modern software.
Yeah, software keeps getting more and more complicated.
It's like trying to untangle a giant ball of yarn. There are so many interconnected parts that it can be really hard to understand how everything fits together, let alone test it properly.
And then there's the issue of third-party dependencies. We talked about it a bit earlier, but relying on outside services adds another layer of complexity.
For sure. You might have tested your code perfectly, but what happens if that third-party service suddenly changes or goes down?
It's like building a house on a foundation that could shift at any moment.
Exactly. And because you don't have control over those external factors, you need to be extra careful with your testing.
So it's all about being prepared and having a plan B.
Always have a plan B. The article also mentions environment management. Ideally, you want to test your software in an environment that's as close as possible to the real world.
So it actually works when it's released, not just in some perfect testing scenario.
Precisely. But Recreating that real-world environment can be difficult and expensive, especially for big projects.
So it's a balancing act.
It is. You want to be thorough, but you also have to be realistic about your time, budget, and resources.
Right. This deep dive has really shown me how important and complex integration testing can be.
It is. It's not just a technical detail. It's about making sure the software we use is reliable and trustworthy. The software that powers our lives.
Okay, so far we've learned about different types of integration testing. We've looked at some success stories and some cautionary tales.
And we've started to touch on some of the best practices and the challenges involved.
It's clear that integration testing is about a lot more than just checking off a box. It's about building software that we can depend on, but are not done yet.
There's more to come.
We'll be back in the next part of this deep dive to explore even more about integration testing, so stay tuned.
Yeah, it's a big wake-up call. Even the coolest tech is useless if it doesn't work with everything else.
Right, right. This next one hits close to home for me. It's about a banking app.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, the kind we use every day to manage our money.
Makes you think.
So this app, it had all the standard features, check your balance, transfer money, all that.
The essentials.
But what they didn't properly test was how all those features work together, especially when you were doing a bunch of things at once.
Oh, like rapid-fire transfers and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And what happened? Did people lose money?
Thankfully, no. No money vanished. But what they found during integration testing were these, data discrepancies. Imagine making several transfers really quickly, but your balance doesn't update right away.
That's scary. You think you have money, but do you really?
It's unsettling, for sure. Turns out the problem was with the app's APIs, those little messengers that let different parts of the system talk to each other. They weren't handling all that data fast enough.
It's kind of freaky how much we trust these apps with our money.
Right. You'd think they'd be tested super thoroughly.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've seen how skipping integration testing can lead to financial disaster and a damaged reputation. But does the article have any examples of when it went right?
It does. There's this case study about a social media company, and they were rolling out this new feature where you could tag friends in photos.
Seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, but there's a lot happening under the hood to make that work smoothly. Image processing, user databases, notifications, all while keeping people's privacy in check.
Yeah, it's more complicated than it looks at first.
Way more. In this company, they were serious about integration testing, and it paid off because they found a bug where people who were tagged in photos, they weren't always getting notifications.
So someone could be talking about you in a photo, but you'd have no idea.
Exactly. And for a social media company, that's a big no-no. But because they caught it early, they fixed it before it became a problem for users.
Nice save. So these case studies really show how integration testing can either prevent a total meltdown or create this smooth, seamless experience for users.
It's not just about avoiding bugs. It's about building trust in the software we use every day. So how do we make sure we're doing integration testing the right way, getting it right from the start?
Yeah, let's talk strategy.
One of the biggest things the article talks about is automation.
Automation, I feel like that's the buzzword in tech these days.
For good reason. Imagine having to manually test every single interaction in a complex system.
Just thinking about it makes me tired.
Right. With automation, you can write scripts that do all that testing for you, automatically.
So instead of a bunch of people clicking around, you have software doing the heavy lifting.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's faster, more accurate, and you can even set it up to run every time new code is added. Which brings us to another key best practice. Continuous integration.
Continuous integration. That sounds familiar.
It's a game changer. Basically, every time a developer changes the code, those changes are tested automatically.
So you're constantly checking for errors.
Exactly. It's way more efficient than waiting till the end of a project to do all your testing at once.
I can see why that would be a good thing.
Right. And the article also stresses the importance of prioritizing. Not all parts of a system are equally important. Some are riskier than others.
Makes sense, like parts that handle sensitive data or that are more likely to have problems.
Exactly. So you focus your energy on those high-risk areas, make sure those are working perfectly. It's all about strategy.
Smart. This all makes sense, but in the real world, I'm sure it's not always so easy, right? What are some of the challenges of integration testing?
Of course. Nothing's ever perfect. One of the biggest challenges is just how complex software is these days.
It's true. It seems like it just keeps getting more and more complicated.
It's like trying to untangle this giant ball of yarn. So many interconnected parts, APIs, databases, external services. It can be really hard to wrap your head around it all.
Right, right.
And then you have third-party dependencies, stuff that's outside your control.
We talked about that a little earlier, right? Relying on other companies' services.
Yeah, and that can be a big headache. Your code might be perfect, but what if that third-party service changes or goes down? Suddenly your whole system is messed up.
It's like building a house on shaky ground.
Exactly. And because you can't control those outside factors, you need to be super careful with your testing and always have a backup plan.
Always have a backup plan. Good advice. Anything else we should be aware of?
The article talks about environment management. You want to test your software in an environment that's as close as possible to the real world.
So it's not just working in some like perfect little testing bubble.
Right. You want to make sure it works in the wild. But setting up that real-world environment can be tough, especially for big projects. It takes time, money, and resources.
So there's always a trade-off.
There is. You want to be thorough, but you also have to be practical.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. Integration testing is way more important than I realized.
It is. It's not just a technical thing. It's about building software that we can trust. Software that makes our lives easier, not harder.
And we're not done yet. There's still more to explore.
Oh yeah, we've just scratched the surface.
We'll be back in the next part of this deep dive to uncover even more about integration testing, so stick around.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay, I'm listening.
We've talked a lot about the technical stuff,
Hmm.
but honestly, I think there's a bigger picture here.
Go on.
It's not just about the tech. Software quality, it's a human issue too.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. All the software we use every day, it shapes how we experience things,
Right, we rely on it so much that we kind of forget about it until it stops working.
Exactly. And that's why integration testing matters. It's about making sure the tech we depend on is reliable, that it's trustworthy, that it actually helps us, not hinders us.
It's like building a bridge. You wouldn't just slap it together and hope for the best.
No.
You test each piece, each connection to make sure it can handle the load, right?
Absolutely. And software should be the same. We got to be just as rigorous with testing so the stuff we build is strong, resilient, ready for anything.
Makes sense. So how do we get there? How do we encourage better integration testing across the board?
I think awareness is a big part of it.
Okay.
We got to educate ourselves, talk about it, push for higher standards of quality in all the software we use.
And support the companies that are already doing it right, call out the ones that aren't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for developers out there, it's got to be part of the process from day one, not an afterthought.
Build it in from the beginning.
Yep. It's a shift in thinking. It's not just about meeting deadlines. It's about building something we can be proud of, something that actually works.
This deep dive has been awesome, honestly. I learned so much about integration testing that I never even thought about before.
It's one of those things that's hidden, but it affects all of us,
Yeah,
every day.
it really does. Well, we've covered a lot today. Different types of integration testing, real-world examples, best practices, even some of the roadblocks along the way.
It's a complex topic, but hopefully this has helped make it a little clearer, a little more understandable.
Definitely. To all our listeners out there, thanks for sticking with us on this deep dive into integration testing. Hope you found it useful, maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Keep those questions coming, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning.
And keep diving deep.